Sarah Martinez had never held a gun before in her 32 years of life. Growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Denver, Colorado, firearms were something she only saw in movies or on the news. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled into the parking lot of Rocky Mountain Shooting Range on that crisp October morning. The building looked intimidating with its concrete walls and small windows, nothing like the cheerful yoga studio she usually visited on Saturday mornings. The decision to come here hadn't been easy. For weeks, Sarah had been receiving strange phone calls at her apartment. Heavy breathing, whispered threats, and hang-ups that left her feeling vulnerable and scared. The police had been polite but unhelpful, explaining that without concrete evidence or a clear threat, there was little they could do. Her brother Jake had suggested she learn to protect herself, and after another sleepless night spent checking locks and jumping at every sound, Sarah finally agreed. Walking through the glass doors of the shooting range felt like entering another world. The smell of gunpowder and cleaning oil hit her immediately. Behind the counter stood a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands. His name tag read Frank Wilson, head instructor. Frank had been running this range for over 20 years and had seen all types of people walk through those doors. Nervous first-timers, experienced hunters, law enforcement officers, and everyone in between. "You must be Sarah," Frank said with a reassuring smile. "Your brother called ahead and told me you were coming. First time shooting." Sarah nodded, her voice catching slightly in her throat. "I've never even touched a gun before. I'm not sure I can do this." Frank's expression softened. He had daughters of his own and understood the mix of fear and determination he saw in Sarah's eyes. "That's perfectly normal. We'll take it slow and start with the basics. By the end of today, you'll feel much more confident." The range had several other customers that morning. In Lane 3, a middle-aged police officer named Detective Rodriguez was practicing his qualification shots. He had been coming to this range for 15 years and knew Frank well. In Lane 7, a young military veteran named Marcus was working on his marksmanship skills, preparing for a competitive shooting event. At the far end, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chun was calmly and methodically firing rounds with impressive accuracy, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Frank led Sarah to a quiet corner of the range where he could properly introduce her to firearm safety. The first rule, he explained, was to always treat every gun as if it were loaded. The second was never to point a weapon at anything you didn't intend to destroy. The third was to keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. The fourth was to be sure of your target and what was beyond it. Sarah listened intently, taking notes on a small notepad she had brought with her. She asked questions about everything: how the safety worked, how to hold the gun properly, how to aim, how to stand. Frank was impressed by her attention to detail and her obvious desire to do everything correctly. "Now," Frank said, reaching into a case behind him, "we're going to start you off with this." He pulled out what appeared to be a standard pistol. It looked real enough to Sarah, with its black metal frame and textured grip. "This is a training pistol that fires blank cartridges. It has the same weight and feel as a real gun, but it won't fire any actual bullets. It's perfect for beginners to get comfortable with the mechanics of shooting." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. The idea of firing a real bullet had been terrifying her since she walked in. A blank pistol seemed much less intimidating. Frank explained that the blank cartridges would still make noise and produce a flash, giving her the full experience of shooting without the danger of an actual projectile. They spent the next hour going over proper stance and grip. Frank showed her how to stand with her feet shoulder-width apart, how to lean slightly forward, and how to hold the pistol with both hands for maximum control. Sarah's hands were shaking at first, but gradually steadied as she became more comfortable with the weight of the weapon in her grip. "Remember," Frank said, adjusting her grip slightly, "shooting is all about fundamentals: sight alignment, breathing, trigger control. Master these basics, and everything else will follow." Other customers at the range began to notice the lesson taking place. Detective Rodriguez glanced over during a break in his own practice, remembering his own first days learning to shoot as a rookie cop. The nervousness and concentration on Sarah's face reminded him of his younger self. Marcus, the veteran, nodded approvingly at Frank's patient teaching style. Mrs. Chin smiled to herself, thinking of her own granddaughter who was about Sarah's age. The blank pistol felt surprisingly heavy in Sarah's hands. Frank had explained that it weighed exactly the same as its live ammunition counterpart, which helped new shooters develop proper muscle memory. The grip was textured to prevent slipping, and the trigger had the same resistance as a real firearm. Now we're going to practice what's called dry firing, Frank explained. That means pulling the trigger on an empty chamber. It helps you get used to the trigger pull without any noise or recoil. Sarah practiced the motion dozens of times. Frank watched carefully, correcting her finger placement and reminding her to squeeze straight back rather than jerking the trigger to one side. Gradually, her movements became more natural and confident. "You're doing great," Frank encouraged. "Most people take much longer to get comfortable with the basics. You have good natural instincts." Sarah felt a small surge of pride. She had always been someone who worked hard to master new skills, whether it was learning piano as a child or mastering complicated software at her job as a graphic designer. This felt different, though, more primal, more directly connected to her own safety and survival. As they prepared to load the blank cartridges, Frank noticed something unusual. The box of blanks he had grabbed looked slightly different than usual. The packaging was similar, but the logo was slightly off. He had ordered these blanks from his regular supplier just last week, but something seemed odd about them. "Just a second," he said to Sarah, examining the box more closely. "Let me double-check these cartridges." Frank had been in the business long enough to trust his instincts. He opened the box and examined one of the cartridges. To his trained eye, it looked normal, brass casing, crimped end where a blank should be. But something was nagging at him. The weight felt slightly different, though he couldn't be sure. Meanwhile, Sarah was growing more anxious. The delay was making her second-guess her decision to be here. The other shooters were firing their weapons with loud pops and bangs that made her jump despite the ear protection Frank had given her. The smell of gunpowder was getting stronger, and she was beginning to feel overwhelmed. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing Frank's concerned expression. "Oh yes, absolutely," Frank replied, not wanting to alarm his student. "I just want to make sure we have the right training ammunition. Safety first, always." Frank decided to test one of the cartridges himself before handing the pistol to Sarah. He loaded a single blank into his own training pistol and fired it into the range's backstop. The flash and bang seemed normal for a blank cartridge. Perhaps he had been overthinking things. What Frank didn't know was that his regular supplier had made a mistake with his last order. Due to a mix-up at the warehouse, his box of blank cartridges had been contaminated with a small number of live rounds. The cartridges looked nearly identical from the outside, and only a trained expert examining them closely would notice the subtle differences. The contamination had happened when a new warehouse employee had accidentally mixed together two similar-looking boxes during packing. One contained blank cartridges destined for Frank's range, while the other contained live practice ammunition meant for a police training facility. By the time anyone realized the error, the packages had already been shipped. Sarah watched as Frank loaded what she believed was a blank cartridge into her training pistol. Her heart was racing, but she felt ready to take this next step. All the practice with the empty pistol had helped her feel more confident. She understood the basic mechanics now, and Frank's patient instruction had put her at ease. "Remember everything we practiced," Frank said, handing her the loaded pistol. "Stance, grip, sight alignment. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger straight back slowly and steadily." Sarah took a deep breath and raised the pistol toward the target. Her stance was good. Her grip was firm but not tense. She lined up the front sight with the rear sight, just as Frank had taught her. The target was only 15 feet away, a simple black circle on white paper. Detective Rodriguez happened to look over at that moment. Something caught his eye about the way Sarah was holding the pistol. Her form was good for a beginner, but there was something in her expression that reminded him of his own early days on the force. The concentration, the slight nervousness, the determination to do everything right. Marcus also glanced over, impressed by Frank's teaching methods. The old instructor clearly knew how to work with nervous beginners. Marcus remembered his own first shooting lessons in the military, where the drill sergeants were considerably less patient and encouraging. Mrs. Chin paused in her own shooting to watch the lesson. She appreciated seeing women learning to protect themselves. In her own youth in Taiwan, such opportunities had been rare. She admired Sarah's courage in facing her fears and learning something completely new and challenging. As Sarah prepared to pull the trigger, she thought about why she was here. The phone calls that had been terrorizing her, the feeling of helplessness when she couldn't sleep at night, the frustration with a system that couldn't protect her until something bad actually happened. This wasn't just about learning to shoot. It was about taking back some measure of control over her own life. The range suddenly felt very quiet despite the other shooters. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and breathing through the ear protection. Frank stood slightly behind and, to her right, ready to offer guidance or assistance if needed. The fluorescent lights overhead cast sharp shadows on the concrete floor. "Take your time," Frank said softly. "There's no rush. Breathe normally, and, when you're ready, start applying pressure to the trigger." Sarah began to squeeze. The trigger had more resistance than she expected, but she remembered Frank's instructions about a slow, steady pull straight back. She could feel the mechanism engaging as she increased pressure. The moment stretched on as Sarah focused entirely on proper technique. She had no way of knowing that the cartridge in her pistol was not the harmless blank she believed it to be. Frank had no idea that his supplier's error was about to turn a routine training session into something much more serious. The other shooters continued their own practice, unaware that they were about to witness something that would shock everyone present and change Sarah's life forever. The morning that had started as a simple self-defense lesson was about to take a turn that none of them could have anticipated. Detective Rodriguez finished his current magazine and reached for his case to reload. Marcus adjusted his stance and prepared for his next series of shots. Mrs. Chin calmly lined up her sights on a fresh target. Frank watched his student with the pride of a good instructor, pleased with how well Sarah had absorbed her lessons. And Sarah, focused entirely on her breathing and trigger control, continued to apply steady pressure to what she believed was a harmless training pistol loaded with nothing more than a blank cartridge. The shot echoed through the range with a sound that was noticeably different from the blanks Frank had been expecting. Instead of the muffled pop of a blank cartridge, there was a sharp crack followed by the distinct whistle of a bullet traveling downrange. Frank's eyes widened in shock as he realized what had just happened. Sarah felt the recoil push back against her hands, much stronger than she had expected for a blank. The muzzle flash was brighter, the sound sharper, and there was a different smell in the air. She lowered the pistol, confused by the unexpected intensity of the experience. "Frank," she said, turning toward her instructor with a puzzled expression. "Was that supposed to feel like that? It seemed much more powerful than you described." Frank's face had gone pale. His 20 years of experience told him immediately that Sarah had just fired a live round, not a blank. His mind raced as he tried to process what had happened and what needed to be done next. The safety of everyone in the range was his responsibility, and a live round had just been fired from what was supposed to be a training pistol. Before Frank could respond, Detective Rodriguez's voice cut through the air. "Hold on," he called out, walking quickly toward their lane. His trained ear had caught the difference in the gunshot as well. "That didn't sound like a blank to me." Marcus had also stopped shooting and was looking in their direction. His military experience had taught him to recognize different types of ammunition by sound, and he was certain he had just heard a live round being fired. Mrs. Chun had paused as well, her experienced shooter's instincts telling her something was wrong. Frank immediately took control of the situation. "Sarah, please set the pistol down on the counter and step back," he said calmly but firmly. Despite his inner alarm, he knew that panicking would only make things worse. "Everyone else, cease fire for a moment." The range fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Frank approached the target Sarah had been aiming at, his stomach clenched with worry. If a live round had been fired, there should be evidence of bullet impact somewhere downrange. What he found made his heart skip a beat. There, in the center of the target, was a clean bullet hole. Not the large, irregular mark that would have been left by a blank's wadding, but a precise round hole that could only have been made by an actual bullet. The round had passed completely through the paper target and embedded itself in the backstop behind. "Jesus," Detective Rodriguez muttered as he joined Frank at the target. "That's definitely a bullet hole. How the hell did a live round get mixed in with training ammunition?" Frank's mind was reeling. He had been using that supplier for years without incident. He personally checked every shipment that came in. How had a live cartridge gotten mixed in with the blanks? More importantly, what if Sarah had been hurt? What if someone else had been in danger? Sarah stood frozen behind them, beginning to understand that something had gone very wrong. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaky. "You said it was a blank. What does this mean?" Frank turned to face her, his expression serious but reassuring. "Sarah, you accidentally fired a live round instead of a blank. The good news is that you hit exactly where you were aiming, and no one was hurt. But this is a very serious situation that we need to investigate immediately." The implications began to sink in for everyone present. If Sarah had been pointing the pistol anywhere other than downrange when she pulled the trigger, the consequences could have been catastrophic. A live round fired in an unintended direction could have injured or killed someone. Marcus approached the group, his military bearing evident in his measured steps. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "you should know that your shooting form was excellent. Even under these unexpected circumstances, you maintained proper safety protocols and hit your target. That speaks well of your training and your instructor." Detective Rodriguez was already on his radio, calling for backup and notifying the range safety officer. As a law enforcement officer, he was required to report any incidents involving firearms, especially one involving the accidental discharge of live ammunition in what was supposed to be a training environment. Mrs. Chun walked over to the group, her elderly face creased with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked Sarah. "That must have been quite a shock." Sarah nodded numbly, still trying to process what had happened. "I could have hurt someone," she whispered. "What if I had been pointing it the wrong way? What if someone had been standing downrange?" Frank placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "But you weren't, and no one was. You followed every safety rule we went over. You kept the pistol pointed downrange at all times. Your discipline and attention to safety prevented what could have been a tragedy." The range's general manager, a serious woman named Patricia Williams, arrived within minutes. She had been in her office when she heard about the incident over the radio. Patricia had been managing shooting ranges for over 15 years and had seen various types of accidents and incidents, but a live round mixed in with blanks was something new. "Frank, what's the situation?" Patricia asked, her tone professional but concerned. Frank explained what had happened, showing her the ammunition box and the bullet hole in the target. Patricia examined the remaining cartridges in the box, her trained eye looking for any other potential live rounds that might have been mixed in with the blanks. "We need to shut down the range immediately," Patricia decided. "Every cartridge in this box needs to be individually inspected. We need to contact our supplier and find out how this happened. And we need to document everything for the investigation." Detective Rodriguez finished his radio call and rejoined the group. "I've got officers on the way to take statements and photographs. This will need to be investigated as a potential case of negligent endangerment, though it appears to have been accidental." Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. "Am I going to be arrested? I didn't know it was a live round. I was just following instructions." "No," Detective Rodriguez assured her. "You're not going to be arrested. You were acting under the instruction of a qualified firearms instructor and following all safety protocols. If anyone bears responsibility here, it would be the supplier who mixed live rounds with training ammunition." Frank was conducting his own investigation of the ammunition box. He found the shipping label and order number, comparing them with his original purchase order. Everything appeared to be correct on his end. The error had definitely occurred somewhere in the supply chain. "I've ordered from Precision Training Supplies for over 5 years," Frank told Patricia. "Never had a problem like this before. Someone there made a serious mistake." Meanwhile, Marcus had taken it upon himself to examine the other lanes and backstops to ensure that no other live rounds had been accidentally fired during the morning's activities. His military training had taught him to be thorough in any safety investigation. Mrs. Chin stayed close to Sarah, sensing that the young woman needed moral support. "When I first started shooting 50 years ago in Taiwan," she said quietly, "my instructor told me that shooting sports teach you more about yourself than any other activity. How you handle unexpected situations, how you manage stress, how you follow safety protocols even under pressure. Today you learned something very important about yourself." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "That you can be trusted with responsibility. Even when everything went wrong, you did everything right." Frank was grateful for Mrs. Chin's words. As an instructor, one of his greatest fears was that a student would be so traumatized by a negative experience that they would never want to try shooting again. But Mrs. Chun was right. Sarah had demonstrated excellent judgment and safety awareness throughout the incident. Patricia had completed her inspection of the remaining ammunition and found 2 more cartridges that appeared to be live rounds rather than blanks. "We have a serious contamination problem," she announced. At least 3 live rounds were mixed in with what were supposed to be training blanks. The gravity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone. If Sarah had been a less disciplined student, if she had violated muzzle discipline, if she had pointed the pistol in an unsafe direction, people could have died. Detective Rodriguez's backup officers arrived and began documenting the scene. They photographed the target with the bullet hole, the ammunition box, and the individual cartridges. They took detailed statements from everyone present, treating the incident as a serious safety violation rather than a criminal matter. Sarah watched the investigation unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. She had come to the range to learn how to protect herself, and instead had stumbled into a situation that could have resulted in tragedy. The irony was not lost on her. "I want to continue learning," she told Frank during a quiet moment in the investigation. "What happened today wasn't your fault, and it wasn't mine. It was an equipment failure, essentially. I still need to learn how to protect myself." Frank was impressed by her resilience. Many students would have been too shaken to ever want to handle a firearm again. Sarah's determination to continue despite the frightening experience showed real character. Patricia was on the phone with the supplier, her voice stern as she demanded an explanation for how live ammunition had been mixed with training blanks. The conversation was heated, with Patricia making it clear that this incident could result in serious legal and financial consequences for their company. Marcus completed his safety sweep and reported back to Patricia. "All other lanes are clear. No evidence of any other accidental live round discharges. This appears to be isolated to the contaminated ammunition box." Mrs. Chun had taken Sarah aside to share some of her own experiences learning to shoot. "In my early days, I had an instructor who told me that the day you become completely comfortable around firearms is the day you should stop shooting. The awareness that these are dangerous tools that require constant respect and attention is what keeps everyone safe." The police investigation continued for over 2 hours. Every aspect of the incident was documented, from the shipping records to the individual cartridges to the statements of all witnesses. Detective Rodriguez's report would become part of a larger investigation into the supplier's quality control processes. Frank felt terrible about what had happened, even though he knew he had followed all proper procedures. He had checked the shipping label, stored the ammunition properly, and provided excellent safety instruction to his student. The failure had occurred somewhere else in the supply chain, but he still felt responsible for Sarah's experience. "I've been teaching firearms safety for 20 years, he told Sarah. "I've never had anything like this happen before. I want you to know that this is not normal, and it doesn't represent the standards of instruction you should expect." Sarah appreciated Frank's honesty and his obvious concern for her well-being. Despite the shocking experience, she had learned valuable lessons about firearm safety, proper shooting technique, and the importance of following protocols even under pressure. As the investigation wound down, Patricia announced her decision to suspend all training activities using blank ammunition until the supplier issue could be resolved. "We'll switch to dry fire training and laser simulation systems until we can guarantee the safety of our training ammunition," she declared. Detective Rodriguez finished his paperwork and approached Sarah one final time. "I want you to know that your behavior throughout this incident was exemplary. You maintained safe handling practices, followed your instructor's guidance, and kept the firearm pointed in a safe direction at all times. Those actions probably prevented a serious tragedy." The words provided some comfort to Sarah, but she was still processing the emotional impact of what had happened. She had fired her first shot, but not under the circumstances she had expected. The experience had been more intense, more real, and more dangerous than anyone had planned. Frank walked her to her car as the range prepared to close for the day. "I'd like you to come back next week," he said. "I want to make sure you have a positive learning experience that isn't overshadowed by today's incident. We'll start with completely safe dry fire practice and work our way back up to live ammunition when you're ready." Sarah looked back at the range building, her emotions conflicted. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also taught her something important about herself and about the serious responsibility that came with handling firearms. She was more determined than ever to learn proper self-defense, but Now she understood just how important proper training and safety protocols really were. The news of the incident at Rocky Mountain shooting range spread quickly through the local firearms community. By Monday morning, Patricia Williams was fielding phone calls from concerned customers, local media outlets, and representatives from various shooting organizations. The story of a first-time shooter accidentally firing live ammunition when she thought she was using blanks had captured public attention. Sarah returned to work at her graphic design firm that Monday, feeling changed by the weekend's events. Her colleagues noticed she seemed different, more focused, more aware of her surroundings, carrying herself with a new confidence despite the traumatic experience. When her best friend and co-worker Jenny asked about her weekend, Sarah found herself sharing more than she had intended. "I almost shot someone," Sarah said during their lunch break, the words still feeling surreal as she spoke them. Jenny nearly choked on her sandwich. "What do you mean you almost shot someone?" "You went to learn target practice." Sarah explained the entire incident, from her first nervous moments at the range to the shocking discovery that she had fired a live round instead of a blank. Jenny listened with growing amazement and concern. "My God, Sarah, you could have been killed. What if the gun had malfunctioned? What if you had been pointing it the wrong way?" "That's what's so strange," Sarah replied. "I keep thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong, but I also keep thinking about how I handled it correctly. The instructor said I did everything right, even when everything else went wrong." Detective Rodriguez had spent his Monday morning reviewing the reports from the shooting range incident and coordinating with other agencies investigating the ammunition supplier. Precision Training Supplies was facing serious questions about their quality control processes, and Rodriguez suspected this might not be an isolated incident. His investigation revealed that the company had recently hired several new warehouse employees and had been experiencing rapid growth that strained their existing safety protocols. The mixing of live ammunition with training blanks appeared to have occurred during a particularly busy shipping period when multiple orders were being processed simultaneously. Meanwhile, Frank Wilson was conducting his own review of the incident with Patricia Williams. They had decided to implement new safety protocols that would prevent similar occurrences in the future. "We're going to personally inspect every single cartridge before it goes into a training pistol," Frank announced. "It's more time-consuming, but after what happened with Sarah, we can't take any chances." Patricia had been in contact with other shooting ranges across the country, discovering that Rocky Mountain shooting range was not the only facility to receive contaminated ammunition from Precision Training Supplies. Similar incidents had occurred at ranges in Texas, Florida, and Oregon, though none with outcomes as fortunate as Sarah's. "We're looking at a lawsuit," Patricia told Frank. "Not just from us, but from multiple ranges that received dangerous ammunition. This company's negligence could have resulted in multiple fatalities." Frank felt responsible despite knowing that the fault lay with the supplier. He had been Sarah's instructor, and her safety had been his responsibility. The fact that she had emerged from the experience unharmed and even more determined to continue learning was something of a miracle. Sarah returned to the range the following Saturday, as Frank had suggested. The media attention had died down somewhat, but there were still reporters who occasionally called asking for interviews. Sarah had declined all media requests, wanting to focus on her training rather than becoming a public face for shooting range safety. This time, Frank began with an extended discussion of what had happened the previous week. He wanted Sarah to understand exactly how the incident had occurred and what measures were being taken to prevent future occurrences. "Every cartridge you'll fire from now on will be personally inspected by me," Frank promised. "We're also implementing a double-check system where another instructor will verify each cartridge before it's loaded into your pistol." Sarah appreciated the extra precautions, but she had done her own research during the week and understood that the incident had been extraordinary rather than typical. "I know that what happened was unusual," she said. "I've been reading about shooting range safety, and incidents like this are extremely rare." Frank was impressed by her research and her analytical approach to the situation. Many students would have been too emotional to think clearly about the technical aspects of what had occurred. Mrs. Chun had also returned to the range that Saturday, partly to continue her own practice, but mainly to check on Sarah's progress. The elderly woman had been shooting for decades and had developed an intuitive sense for people who would succeed in the shooting sports. "How are you feeling about all this?" Mrs. Chun asked Sarah as they prepared for the day's lesson. Strangely, I feel more confident than I did before, Sarah replied. I know now that I can handle a firearm safely even under unexpected circumstances. That's actually reassuring. Detective Rodriguez stopped by the range during his off-duty hours to check on the new safety protocols and to see how Sarah was progressing. As the investigating officer, he felt a personal interest in ensuring that the range had implemented proper safeguards. You've become something of a legend around the police station, he told Sarah with a smile. The rookie who fired a perfect shot with her first trigger pull, even when everything went wrong. Sarah blushed at the attention, but she was beginning to understand that her accurate shot had been remarkable under any circumstances, let alone during such an unusual incident. This week's lesson began with extensive dry-fire practice. Frank wanted Sarah to become completely comfortable with the mechanical aspects of shooting before introducing any ammunition, even properly inspected training rounds. They worked on trigger control, sight alignment, and breathing for over an hour. Marcus, the military veteran, had also returned and asked Frank if he could observe Sarah's lesson. Her handling of the previous week's incident had impressed him, and he was curious to see how she would perform under normal circumstances. Mind if I watch? Marcus asked Sarah. I'm always interested in good instruction technique, and Frank is one of the best teachers I've seen. Sarah was nervous about having an audience, but she agreed. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe without interfering with the lesson. Frank introduced a laser training system that allowed Sarah to practice shooting without any ammunition at all. The pistol was equipped with a laser that would show exactly where her shot would have hit when she pulled the trigger. This technology allowed for safe practice while building muscle memory and confidence. This is fascinating, Sarah said as she watched the red dot appear on the target with each trigger pull. I can see exactly what my trigger technique is doing to my accuracy. The laser system revealed that Sarah had excellent natural shooting instincts. Her shots were consistently grouped in the center of the target, with only minor variations that Frank could easily help her correct. You have a real talent for this, Frank observed. Your hand-eye coordination and your ability to focus are both exceptional. Marcus nodded in agreement from his observation position. Your breathing control is better than most people achieve after months of practice, he added. Mrs. Chin joined them at the laser training station, bringing her own decades of experience to bear on Sarah's instruction. The most important thing about shooting, she told Sarah, is that it teaches you to be present in the moment. You cannot think about yesterday or tomorrow when you are lining up a shot. You must be completely focused on what you are doing right now. Sarah found this philosophy appealing. Her job as a graphic designer required similar focus and attention to detail, but shooting seemed to demand an even higher level of mental discipline. After an hour of laser training, Frank decided Sarah was ready to try live ammunition again. This time, however, every cartridge would be individually inspected by both Frank and Patricia, who had joined them for this critical moment. We're going to start with just one cartridge, Frank announced. I will personally verify that it is the correct training ammunition before loading it into your pistol. The inspection process was thorough and deliberate. Frank examined the cartridge under a magnifying glass, checking the head stamp, measuring the overall length, and comparing it with a known training round. Patricia performed her own independent inspection before agreeing that the cartridge was safe for training use. Sarah watched the inspection process with interest rather than anxiety. Understanding the technical aspects of ammunition and safety protocols made her feel more confident rather than more worried. I appreciate you taking the time to explain everything, Sarah told Frank. Knowing why you're doing each safety check helps me understand what I should be looking for in the future. When Frank finally loaded the verified training cartridge into Sarah's pistol, the atmosphere was noticeably different from the previous week. Everyone present understood exactly what type of ammunition was being used, and multiple people had verified its safety. Sarah's stance and grip were even better than they had been the previous week. The laser training had helped her refine her technique, and the additional practice had increased her confidence. When she raised the pistol toward the target, her movements were smooth and deliberate. Remember your breathing, Frank coached. Nice steady pressure on the trigger. The shot, when it came, was exactly what everyone had expected from a training round. The muffled pop of the blank cartridge, the moderate recoil, and the lack of any bullet impact downrange. Sarah lowered the pistol with a satisfied smile. That felt much more like what you described last week, she said to Frank. I can definitely tell the difference now. Detective Rodriguez, who had remained at the range to observe, nodded approvingly. Perfect safety protocol from everyone involved. This is how training should work. Frank loaded a second verified cartridge, and Sarah fired again with the same excellent results. Her confidence was growing with each successful shot, and her technique was becoming more natural and fluid. Mrs. Chin complimented Sarah on her progress. Most people take weeks to develop the kind of consistency you're showing already. You have a natural talent for this sport. Marcus agreed with Mrs. Chin's assessment. Your muscle memory is developing quickly, and your mental focus is excellent. Have you considered competitive shooting? Sarah was surprised by the suggestion. She had come to the range to learn basic self-defense, not to pursue shooting as a sport. But the idea was intriguing, especially given the positive feedback she was receiving from experienced shooters. I never thought about competition, Sarah admitted. I just wanted to learn how to protect myself. Frank explained that many competitive shooters had started with self-defense training. The skills transfer directly, he said. Competitive shooting just gives you more opportunities to practice and refine your technique. As the lesson continued, Sarah fired a total of 10 verified training rounds, each one handled with the same careful inspection process. Her accuracy was impressive, with all 10 shots landing in the center ring of the target. Patricia had been documenting the new safety protocols with photographs and written reports. The incident from the previous week had forced them to completely overhaul their training procedures, but the result was a much safer and more thorough approach to firearms instruction. What we learned from your incident, Patricia told Sarah, has made us better instructors and has improved safety for everyone who trains here. In a strange way, that accident may prevent future injuries at ranges across the country. The supplier investigation had revealed that precision training supplies had been cutting corners on quality control to meet increased demand. The company was now facing lawsuits from multiple shooting ranges and was cooperating with federal investigators looking into their safety practices. Detective Rodriguez informed the group that other ranges had reported similar incidents with the same supplier's ammunition. Your case is helping build a federal case against this company, he told Sarah. Your careful documentation and the way you handled the situation has provided important evidence. As the day's lesson concluded, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She had gone from someone who had never touched a firearm to someone who was being praised by experienced shooters for her natural talent and safety awareness. Frank offered to continue working with Sarah on advanced training techniques. You have the potential to become an excellent shooter, he said. I'd like to help you develop that potential. Sarah agreed to continue training, but she also wanted to explore the competitive shooting opportunities that Marcus and Mrs. Chun had mentioned. The idea of turning her newfound skills into a sport rather than just a self-defense measure was appealing. Mrs. Chun invited Sarah to attend a local shooting competition the following month. Just to observe, she said. You can see what competitive shooting is like and decide if it interests you. Sarah accepted the invitation, curious to see how her newly developed skills might translate to a competitive environment. The range that had seemed so intimidating just 2 weeks earlier now felt like a place of learning and growth. As she prepared to leave, Sarah realized that the incident with the blank pistol had changed her in ways she was still discovering. She was more confident, more aware of her capabilities under pressure, and more interested in pursuing challenges that would have seemed impossible just a few weeks earlier. 2 months after the incident that had shocked everyone at Rocky Mountain Shooting Range, Sarah Martinez stood at the starting line of her first competitive shooting match. The Colorado State Women's Pistol Championship was being held at a much larger facility than the range where she had learned to shoot, but the principles Frank had taught her remained the same. The harassment phone calls that had originally driven her to learn self-defense had stopped completely after the caller was identified through phone company records and arrested by Detective Rodriguez. It turned out to be a disturbed former coworker who had become obsessed with Sarah after she had politely declined his advances. The man was now receiving psychiatric treatment and facing criminal charges. But Sarah's journey with firearms had evolved far beyond its original purpose. What had begun as a desperate attempt to feel safe had transformed into a passion for precision, discipline, and competition that surprised everyone who knew her. including herself. Frank Wilson stood near the competitor check-in area, beaming with pride as he watched his former student prepare for her first official match. In just 8 weeks, Sarah had progressed from a terrified beginner to someone capable of competing against experienced shooters. Her natural talent, combined with her analytical approach and intense dedication to practice, had produced remarkable results. "I've been coaching for 20 years, Frank told Mrs. Chun, who had also come to support Sarah at the competition. "I've never seen anyone improve as quickly as she has. It's like she was born to do this." Mrs. Chun nodded knowingly. At 73 years old, she had seen many talented shooters come and go in the sport. "Sometimes it takes a dramatic event to reveal what someone is truly capable of," she observed. Sarah discovered something about herself that day when she fired that first shot. Detective Rodriguez had also come to watch the competition, bringing his wife and teenage daughter. The incident at the shooting range had sparked his daughter's interest in learning to shoot, and Rodriguez thought seeing Sarah compete might inspire her to take lessons seriously. "Dad," his daughter asked, "is that really the woman who accidentally fired a live round when she thought it was blank?" "That's her," Rodriguez confirmed. "And watch how she handles herself today. You'll see why we were all so impressed with her composure during that incident." The shooting competition was divided into several stages, each testing different skills and shooting positions. Sarah had been practicing intensively for 6 weeks, working with Frank 3 times per week and attending additional practice sessions on her own. Her scores in practice had been competitive with experienced shooters, but she had never performed under the pressure of actual competition. Marcus, the military veteran who had witnessed Sarah's first lesson, was also competing in the match. He had been following her progress with interest and had offered advice and encouragement during her training. Seeing a fellow shooter develop such skill so quickly reminded him of his own early days learning marksmanship in the Army. "Nervous?" Marcus asked Sarah as they waited for the competition to begin. "Surprisingly, no," Sarah replied. "I keep thinking about that first day when everything went wrong and how I handled it. If I can keep a clear head during something that dangerous and unexpected, I think I can handle competition pressure." The first stage of the competition required shooters to engage multiple targets from a standing position at varying distances. Sarah had practiced this scenario dozens of times, but the presence of other competitors, spectators, and judges created a different atmosphere than the quiet training environment she was used to. When Sarah's name was called, she approached the firing line with the same focused concentration she had developed during her lessons with Frank. Her stance was textbook perfect, her grip firm and consistent. The months of training had ingrained proper technique so deeply that it felt natural even under pressure. The timer's beep signaled the start of her run, and Sarah moved through the course of fire with smooth precision. Her first target fell with a center hit, followed quickly by the second and third. Her movement between shooting positions was efficient and controlled, just as Frank had taught her. Spectators began to take notice of the newcomer who was shooting with the confidence of a much more experienced competitor. Sarah's shots were fast but accurate, and her technique showed none of the hesitation or awkwardness typical of novice competitors. Frank watched with growing excitement as Sarah's scores were posted. She was not only competing successfully against experienced shooters, but actually leading several categories. Her natural talent, combined with intensive training, was producing results that exceeded everyone's expectations. "This is incredible," Frank whispered to Mrs. Chun. "She's shooting better today than she does in practice. The pressure is actually helping her focus." Mrs. Chun smiled knowingly. "Some people perform better when the stakes are higher. Sarah appears to be one of those people." The second stage of the competition tested shooters' ability to engage targets quickly and accurately under time pressure. This was where Sarah's graphic design background proved surprisingly helpful. Her career had trained her to work precisely under tight deadlines, and those same mental skills transferred directly to competitive shooting. Sarah's approach to the second stage was methodical and efficient. She had studied the course layout carefully during the pre-competition walkthrough, planning her strategy for each target engagement. When her turn came, she executed her plan flawlessly. Detective Rodriguez found himself holding his breath as he watched Sarah's performance. The woman who had been so nervous during her first lesson was now demonstrating remarkable composure and skill under competitive pressure. "She's a natural," Rodriguez commented to his wife. Look how calm and focused she is. The competition continued through several more stages, each presenting different challenges and scenarios. Sarah adapted to each new requirement with the same analytical approach she had brought to learning the fundamentals of shooting. Where other competitors might rely on instinct or experience, Sarah used careful observation and strategic thinking. Marcus was having a good competition himself, but he found himself paying as much attention to Sarah's performance as his own. Her rapid development as a shooter was fascinating to observe, and her approach to problem-solving under pressure reminded him of the best soldiers he had served with. She thinks like a tactician, Marcus told Frank between stages. She's not just shooting instinctively. She's analyzing each stage and developing a strategy before she ever touches her gun. Frank had noticed the same quality in Sarah's training. Her background in graphic design had taught her to break complex problems into smaller, manageable components. She applied the same methodology to shooting, analyzing each element of her performance and working systematically to improve. As the competition entered its final stages, Sarah found herself in third place overall and leading the novice division by a substantial margin. The pressure of being in contention for awards might have overwhelmed a less experienced competitor, but Sarah seemed to thrive on it. Mrs. Chen observed Sarah's demeanor as she prepared for the final stage. Look at her face, she said to Frank. She's completely relaxed. This is what we call being in the zone. The final stage was the most challenging, requiring shooters to engage targets at long range with precision shots. This was where experience typically showed its greatest advantage, as veteran competitors relied on years of practice to judge distance, wind, and other variables. Sarah approached the final stage with the same systematic preparation she had used throughout the day. She carefully studied the targets, noted the wind conditions, and adjusted her sights accordingly. Her scientific approach to the sport was evident in every detail of her preparation. When her turn came, Sarah's performance was nearly flawless. Shot after shot found the center of the target with mechanical precision. The crowd of spectators grew quiet as they watched the newcomer deliver what was clearly the best performance of the day. Frank could barely contain his excitement. I can't believe what I'm seeing, he said to Mrs. Chun. She's shooting better than competitors with decades of experience. The final shot echoed across the range, and Sarah lowered her pistol with a satisfied expression. She knew she had shot well, but she was still surprised when the scores were announced, and she found herself not only winning the novice division, but placing second overall in the entire competition. The awards ceremony was emotional for everyone who had witnessed Sarah's journey from terrified beginner to accomplished competitor. Frank presented her with the trophy for first place in the novice division, his pride evident in every word of his congratulatory speech. 8 weeks ago, Frank told the crowd, Sarah had never touched a firearm. Today, she outshot competitors with years of experience. But, more importantly, she did it with grace, sportsmanship, and unwavering attention to safety. Detective Rodriguez and his family approached Sarah after the ceremony to offer their congratulations. His daughter was clearly inspired by what she had witnessed. Mom, I want to learn to shoot like that, Rodriguez's daughter announced. Can I take lessons with Mr. Frank? Rodriguez smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. I think that can be arranged, he said, looking at Frank with a questioning expression. Mrs. Chun presented Sarah with a small gift, an antique shooting medal that had belonged to her late husband. He would have been impressed by your performance today, she said. You have brought honor to the sport. Marcus congratulated Sarah with genuine admiration. I've competed against Olympic-level shooters who weren't as composed as you were today. You have a real future in this sport if you want it. The suggestion of pursuing shooting at an elite level had been growing in Sarah's mind throughout the competition. What had started as a necessity had become a passion, and her natural talent was clearly exceptional. Patricia Williams, the range manager, had driven up from Denver to watch the competition. She was amazed by Sarah's transformation and proud of the role her facility had played in developing such talent. You've become our best advertisement for proper training and safety, Patricia told Sarah. Every time someone asks about the incident with the blank cartridge, I tell them about how you handled it and where it led you. The incident that had initially seemed so traumatic had indeed led Sarah to discover abilities and interests she never knew she possessed. The phone calls that had frightened her into learning self-defense seemed like events from another lifetime. Sarah's co-workers and friends had followed her competitive debut with great interest. Jenny, her best friend from the graphic design firm, had driven up to watch the competition and was amazed by what she saw. "I can't believe this is the same person who was afraid to walk to her car at night just a few months ago," Jenny said. "You look so confident and in control." Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning in October when she first walked into Rocky Mountain shooting range. The scared woman who had trembled while holding an empty pistol had evolved into someone who could perform under pressure, analyze complex problems, and compete successfully against experienced athletes. But perhaps most importantly, she had discovered an inner strength and capability that had been there all along, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal itself. The incident with the blank pistol had been the catalyst for a transformation that went far beyond learning to shoot. Frank offered to continue coaching Sarah as she pursued higher levels of competition. Regional and national matches beckoned, and her rapid improvement suggested she had the potential to compete at the very highest levels of the sport. "I never imagined when I walked into your range that first day that I would be here," Sarah told Frank as they packed up her equipment. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Frank smiled at his former student, now transformed into an accomplished competitor. "You did all the hard work," he replied. "I just provided the guidance. What you've accomplished is the result of your own dedication and natural talent." As Sarah drove home with her trophy, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The frightening phone calls, the nervous first lesson, the shocking incident with the live ammunition, and the months of intensive training that had followed. What had begun as a desperate attempt to feel safe had become a source of confidence, accomplishment, and joy that enriched every aspect of her life. The blank pistol that had shocked everyone at the range had ultimately revealed capabilities within herself that Sarah never knew existed. The phone calls that had once terrorized her seemed insignificant now compared to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead in competitive shooting. Sarah had found her calling in the most unexpected place, and her journey was just beginning. Mrs. Chin's words echoed in her mind as she drove home. Sometimes it takes a dramatic event to reveal what someone is truly capable of. The dramatic event had indeed revealed Sarah's capabilities, but it had also revealed something even more valuable: the confidence to pursue excellence and the courage to embrace unexpected opportunities. The woman who had once been afraid of her own shadow was now looking forward to national-level competition, advanced training, and the pursuit of shooting excellence at the highest levels. The blank pistol had shocked everyone at the range, but what happened next had amazed them all.